Hello and welcome back to Exodus 17's Outreach Masterclass. Today we're going to be doing a thorough self-inventory that will help us pinpoint our areas of strength and weakness in regards to outreach. Out of 5 different characteristics, there will be ones that you'll be better at than others, but when all 5 are really firing, your fire for outreach will be greater than before. Let me just start by asking you this. When you think about having a spiritual conversation with someone who is not a Christ follower, what does it make you feel? Not what would you do, or what do you think you should do, but what emotions well up inside of you when you picture standing in front of someone who you know doesn't share your beliefs, but it's the moment that you get to open your mouth and say something spiritual. How do you feel? Anxious, nervous, apprehensive, terrified? Some outliers may say excited or fired up, but based on those feelings, would you call yourself a reluctant spiritual conversationalist or an eager spiritual conversationalist? Reluctant or eager? No shame, we're going to get real about where we're coming from so that we can improve. According to recent research done by Barna and Lutheran Ministries, 25 years ago, 77% of all Christians felt that their own church did a good job of training them to share their faith. Today that number has dropped to 57%, and only 52% of all Christians feel qualified to share their faith. On the other hand, when a person who's been equipped to share their faith does so, the 3 most dominant emotions they experience are peace, joy, and exhilaration. Do you know anybody like that? Somebody who seems to be eager to share their faith. What are some of their characteristics? Don't just focus on what they do when sharing their faith, but one level deeper. What are some of the characteristics of a person who talks openly about their faith with greater frequency than most? Based on the research for spiritual conversations in the digital age, Barna painted a picture of an eager conversationalist, a person who had conversations about faith more than 10 times a year. So what are we defining as someone who's an eager spiritual conversationalist? Someone who shares about their faith around monthly or more. Looking at those individuals, common characteristics began to emerge. Eager spiritual conversationalists are people who, number 1, embrace the gospel. The gospel means the good news about Jesus. They have a clear and certain understanding that salvation comes from belief in Jesus Christ alone, and forgiveness of sins comes only through the death and resurrection of Jesus. In other words, people don't like to have spiritual conversations if they're still wrestling over the issue of whether a person needs to be in a relationship with Jesus to be saved. They may think that possibly there's more than one way to be made right with God. Or maybe the issue is based around the question of whether sin is really that bad. Like, is what my friend is doing really something that God would say is wrong and needs forgiveness? Isn't that a little old school? And how would I even tell them that if I had to? Better to just avoid the subject of sin by acting like they're doing just fine. Sometimes people are struggling with their own salvation, not confident or secure in it in the first place because of persistent doubts or fears, or even hidden struggles that they may worry would compromise their own salvation. There are lots of reasons that people can be squishy about the good news about Jesus. We'll talk more about what the gospel is and isn't in a future module. But for now, just know that people who are excited and eager about having spiritual conversations are people who have wrestled this to the ground. They know what it takes to be saved, they are saved, and they understand that it's necessary for others to be as well. So on a scale from 0 to 10, where do you fall with that? Of the 5 characteristics that eager spiritual conversationalists have, the second is that they apply spiritual disciplines. Not only do they say faith is very important to their everyday lives, but they actively seek to grow their faith. A person who's excited to share about their faith is exciting. This gets into the whole arena of spiritual disciplines. The words spiritual disciplines doesn't sound too awesome because of the word discipline, but they're just the things that Christ followers do consistently to nurture their inner life. Dallas Willard did a really good job of talking about those things that nurture our inner lives to help us thrive. He said that there are rhythms of abstinence, which include solitude, silence, fasting, frugality, chastity, secrecy, and sacrifice. And then there are rhythms of engagement, which include study, worship, celebration, service, prayer, fellowship, confession, and submission. These are ways that we can actively help our spirits thrive. Our spiritual health is the same in this way as our mental or physical health. If you're exhausted or drained or unhealthy, the last thing you want to do is help others because you need help yourself. But what if you just picked up one of those rhythms and see what it did for you? What if you just set your alarm to read or listen to the Bible every day, or pray or commit to attending church every week? Just one thing to see how it could improve your spiritual health, and then later add one more, and then another and another. Consistently engaging rhythms of spiritual thriving isn't only good for us, it's good for others too. Eager spiritual conversationalists have more to give because they give out of a cup that's overflowing rather than an empty one. So on a scale from 0 to 10, where do you fall with that? Of the 5 characteristics that eager spiritual conversationalists have, the third is that they grasp the calling. These individuals know that they're a part of the priesthood of all believers. They accept a personal responsibility to share their faith with other people. One of the most amazing statistics from Barna's research is that 25 years ago, only 10% of people said that converting people to Christianity is the job of the local church. But 89% of believers said that every Christian has the responsibility to share their faith. Now about 3 times the number of Christians thinks that it's the church's job, and 1/3 less Christians think it's the individual's job. Just to set the record straight, it is both the individual's job and the church's job. Jesus said in Matthew 10:32 that whoever acknowledges me before others, I will also acknowledge before my Father in heaven. So, each individual follower of Jesus today is meant to talk about him to others. And of course, the church, which is the assembly of those Christ followers, shares the same responsibility. But there is also a misconception among Christ followers that if they, as an individual, are not gifted in such a way that sharing their faith in a traditional way comes naturally, then they must not be called to do it. But the truth is, as we pointed out in Matthew, that every Christ follower is called to talk about him to other Christ followers and non-followers, even though it may not look like the traditional way that we imagine. I am sorry that this is harder for some than others, but there are different parts of obeying Jesus that are more challenging for all people of different temperaments. Do you grasp that you have been called to share your faith with others? Remember that with good equipping and some practice, contrary to our expectations, it is possible for the experience to become one that is absolutely delightful. On a scale from 0 to 10, where do you fall with that? Of the 5 characteristics that eager spiritual conversationalists have, the 4th is that they expect spiritual conversations. Picture yourself at school, at work, or with your neighbors. Do you have the expectation that a spiritual conversation will probably come up at some point, or would you be kind of surprised? One of the reasons that eager spiritual conversationalists expect to have spiritual conversations is because some of them actively seek opportunities to share. That's a surefire way to be able to count on a spiritual conversation happening. But many of them also say that spiritual conversations just happen unexpectedly. And there's truth to that. After all, Jesus told his disciples that just as the Father sent him, that he was sending them. A lot of the interactions that we read about in the Bible that Jesus had seem to the casual observer like they just happen unexpectedly, which just goes to show that what sometimes seems random is at times actually orchestrated by God. And you've been sent just like him. To be sent, you don't necessarily get a passport or learn another language. You just see the events of your day through the lens that God has sent you. So that means that the connections that you make with others are purposeful and designed in part for you to share God's love with those people. With that in mind, it would be weird if spiritual conversations didn't come up. This group of eager spiritual conversationalists is ready and willing to participate when they happen. So on a scale from 0 to 10, where do you fall with that? Finally, of the 5 characteristics that eager spiritual conversationalists have, the 5th is that they respond confidently. Overall, these individuals feel qualified to share their faith. It's not that they think that they have all of the answers to every question or challenge that they may run into, but there are a few factors that go into their confidence. One is that while they don't know it all, they do know something about what they're doing. They've been equipped to have a meaningful conversation with someone about their faith, and that's what you're doing through this series. Another reason that they respond confidently is because they depend on God in the moment for what they don't know. If God has called you to do something, then He's going to give you what you need to do it. Having that reliance on God for the process of the conversation takes a lot of pressure off of you. Those who respond confidently also have realistic expectations. The goal isn't necessarily to convert somebody in one conversation. We're just talking about having a spiritual conversation here, helping nudge people one step closer to Jesus, not necessarily making the game-winning goal. It's okay, just talk. People who respond confidently also choose courage. In some ways and to some degree, we can train our emotions by making conscious choices about how we want to feel and behaving like it. If you're not courageous about it right now, guess how you can become more courageous? By acting courageously. And we should feel positively about it, because research shows that eager spiritual conversationalists are glad when they do have a spiritual conversation. They feel peace and joy. They laugh. They face their fears until their fears seem silly, even though they know that these conversations are sometimes difficult. It can be humbling to do a thorough self-inventory of our areas of strength and weakness in regards to outreach. But I know that of these 5 different characteristics of an eager spiritual conversationalist, there are ones that you rock at, and that you could do with a little bit of intentionality to become great at, and become not only able to have a good spiritual conversation, but enjoy it and look forward to when it's going to happen next. So go ahead and use Eager Inventory and Next Steps tools that are provided for you in your participant's guide to discover your best next steps. Thanks a lot. See you next time.